In this video, we're going to be talking about the basics of data functions in Spotfire. Data functions are an advanced feature of Spotfire, but not many people know about them and sometimes get intimidated by them. So before we jump into Spotfire, we're going to go ahead and first outline the basics of what data functions are, and then we'll go demo a specific example. My name is Hussam. I'm a petroleum engineer by background, and I sit at the intersection of AI and tech and oil and gas. So let's go ahead and get started. So on my screen here, we can go ahead and see the basic aspect of data functions. It's simply inputs, some data function, some logic that you want to do to that data, some transformations, additions, whatever it may be, and then you have some outputs. Now, for inputs, this can be a document property. So you can go ahead and feed it in also a table. And really anything else that Spotfire provides as variables or objects within Spotfire specifically. So what we can do then is we can say these specific objects in Spotfire, you can provide them a name. So you can say this table, we can name it as table, and this document property, we can name it as document property. And then we'll go do some logic. Maybe we want to go ahead and update the value of a document property, maybe multiply it by 2 or change the name. And for a table, maybe we want to filter it down, add a column, slice the data, aggregate it, do some machine learning on it in a really quick way, anomaly detection, etc. So you'll be able to do that here. And similarly, on the output side, we can then say, if I copy these over, I can then say map the outputs of my code that I'm going to write here in Python or R to either a document property, a table, etc. And this table can be named whatever. So you can say this is results. This can be a new document property or reference an existing one, saying new document property, right? And you can, and then what Spotfire will do is at any time that you run this specific data function, it'll reference those inputs, run that logic, and then map the outputs to back to Spotfire specific objects that you can go ahead and use. That's really all what data functions are. It allows you to be able to run and manipulate data, or run code and manipulate data in a centralized way, and it becomes really, really powerful when you try and develop apps specifically in Spotfire. Let's go see a few examples. So in Spotfire, if you go to data function properties, this is where you're going to go ahead and see the list of data functions that you have within your report. As you can see here, we have none. So we'll go ahead and register a new one, and we'll go ahead and give this name. While this loads up, we'll go ahead and give it a name of first data function. Now, let's go walk through these options. So you have either the ability to write this in Python, which was recently released a few years ago, I believe, or you can do it in R, whatever you prefer. It's exactly the same thing. In Python, you would specify here if you're using any external packages in Python that you might need if you're going to deploy this data function on a server, which we'll cover in a different section, you would put that here. If you're running this locally, then you don't have to really worry about it. Description, it's always good to be able to describe what your data function does. We can go ahead and say this is just showcasing document and data functions 101. Now, you have this option called allow caching. This is selected by yes by default. What caching is, it's saying, what it says is that if my inputs are exactly the same, I'm just going to provide it the same exact outputs that I had saved in memory without having to run through this whole script again. So if this data function script, the script here, is quite heavy, it makes a lot of sense to be able to cache it so you don't keep doing the same exact calculations over and over again. Spotfire is smart enough to be able to understand when the inputs are different than previous runs, it'll actually go ahead and run it, and it'll save the results in memory, and that way then it can refer back to them if that same exact set of inputs is run. Great. This is where we have our script, and then this is an icon that you can choose for just to be able to signify what this data function is. It's just a nice little addition, really. So we're going to be writing some Python. One thing to note about a script editor here is that it doesn't have IntelliSense, just like it would have in VS Code if you're familiar with an IDE or a cursor, etc. The development experience is not great here. I'll be making a separate video showing you how I personally develop these data functions and more advanced functionality outside of Spotfire, then bringing it back in. But for our purposes, we're going to keep this really simple. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and say test. I'll just go ahead and say test property is equal to, I'll just say a value of test. Okay. We're going to go ahead and just manipulate right now and create a new document property. So on the input parameters, we can go ahead and specify what is coming in. So again, if we go back here, we can refer to anything in Spotfire as an object as an input into what we're going to use it for our script. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to go ahead and say add, and now it's going to ask, what do you want the name to be? This name is what's going to be used within your script. Okay. So I say I want to go ahead and name this variable data. I want this display name to be data. What type of value is this? This is a value, essentially a document property. Is this a column of a table, essentially an array? Or is this a table, which is going to act like a data frame? In this case, we'll go ahead and do a table, and we're going to go and select all. So this is saying what type of allowed data types are you going to allow within this table, this value, or this column. You can also add a description just so it's really good for documentation purposes. Not required though. And then you have a little checkbox at the bottom saying, is this specifically required or not? Sometimes some scripts, you might have some optional information that the user can provide. And if they don't, maybe it changes a little bit of the logic that you do. So if we go ahead and add this in, so now we have this name called data, this variable called data. We have this display name called data. It's a type table. We're allowing everything, all the types in there, and it is required. If I go back to my script, I'm going to go ahead and actually also add in our data, and I'm just going to add a new column. I'm going to say new column. This is just Python syntax, and I'm going to go ahead and assign it a value of 1. Now, on the output side, again, if we go back to our diagram, we're doing some manipulation here. So what we're doing here is we're creating a new a variable that we call test, and we're bringing our table in, and we're adding a column, okay? Now we have to define what the outputs are. So on the output side, what are the outputs? So if we go back here, we have test property. These are the variables. You create whatever you want. This is a full Python script. On the output side, we're going to go ahead and say we have 2 outputs. One is called test property. I'll keep the display name exactly the same. You can change it though. And this is saying how do you want to output this into the Spotfire? What object do you want to bring it back? Is this going to be a value, a column, or a table? So for the first one, it's going to be a value. We're going to click OK. And now what it's going to do is once Spotfire runs the entire script in its entirety, it's going to look at what the value of this test property is, and it's going to assign it as a value. We'll be able to create a custom document property here shortly on exactly this. Now I'll do the same thing on data. So I'll say we have a output called data. Display name is going to be data, but this is going to be a table. Okay. Now, once you have this, so we have a script. We are creating a variable called test property, and we are adding a column to our current data table that's part of Spotfire. Our inputs are just the data table. The outputs are this variable and this data table. Now, how do we officially complete the mapping? Well, you would go ahead and click on run. So if you click on run here, it's going to say, okay, what is the name of your data function? Would you like this to refresh this function automatically? What this means is that do you want to continuously run this function if this input data changes at any point in time, or do you want to be able to manually trigger it? This is really important to understand. If you're running something that's really heavy in computation and requires a lot of inputs from the user, you want to wait until the user is ready before they click a go button. For example, maybe they want to go ahead and forecast a number of wells. Instead of rerunning this script anytime they select a new row of, say, wells they want to go ahead and forecast, give them the option to say first select all your wells and then click run, which will then kick off this function. Okay? Maybe sometimes you do want it to refresh automatically if you're simply just filtering down a data table and creating a different one. There's different use cases for either one. Always run in a separate session. This will go ahead and just spin off a different session to be able to run it behind the scenes. Now, in run location, this is really important as well to know whenever you get into a production environment. So it's either forced local or forced server. If you're working locally, default is completely fine. If you're trying to actually test this, deploying it on your web player internally, you would use forced server to make sure that whenever you're done your local testing is done, you make sure that the server is able to run that. Sometimes you might get errors around missing packages, things like that, etc. This is where you would actually change that. Now, we have one input, so you'll now notice two actually tabs now. You have input and output. This is where we have to specify what these variables things are. So we told Spotfire data is going to be a table input. We said output is going to be test property value, and we said data is going to be table. Okay, so what does that really mean in our Spotfire world? So I'm going to click on input, and now I have to map those values of what this property is. So I'm going to say data is actually coming in from a data table that's also called data, and I want to pass in these columns. Here's all the columns I have for my table, right? And what I can do is I can go ahead and also say, do I want to apply a specific filtering scheme or filtered rows as part of this input? And do I want to associate any specific markings? Right now, I don't have any filtering scheme or markings, so we'll go ahead and ignore this. But in other examples, we'll show how this become really powerful. Now, on the output side, this is where it gets fun. So you have test property of value. It's saying, okay, should I map this type value in Spotfire? We're going to go ahead and create a new document property, and we're going to go ahead and say test results. So what's going to happen is whatever this value of test property is in a data function, it's going to take that value and create a new document property or update it if it's already existing to test result. For this data output, remember we had an output called data, I'm going to create a data table, and I'm going to go ahead and call it data updated. We'll just go ahead and call it that. You can also replace an existing table within Spotfire if this table has already been created before. Great, so now we have that done. So we're going to go ahead and click OK. We're going to close it out. And what you can do to really manually trigger it is you can go ahead and click refresh specifically. If you have any errors, it'll go ahead and pop up here in the notification icon, but it doesn't seem like we had any errors. How do we know this actually worked? Well, what we can do is we can go ahead and add in a table visualization. Here's our main data table, and I should be able to see a data updated table. And I should also be able to see, if I go ahead and add, there should be that one column that we brought in called new column. And that new column, let's go ahead and remove all of this just to make it easy, has a value of 1, because that's what we assigned it with in data function. See that? Now, how do we know the document property worked? Well, if I go to File, and Document Properties, I can see Properties, and I can see a value right here. Test result is equal to test. So what we did, again, is we took inputs of a specific type, we put it into a script, we were able to manipulate that data using Python. By default, any values are just strings or numbers, etc. If you're bringing in a table, it's a pandas data frame. We went ahead and manipulated some data, and then we exported that data back out into 2 new things, one new document property and another table. Now, just to prove that it's working, I can go in data functions here. I can click edit script, and I can go ahead and say this is a new value. And I click save. I'll go ahead and click refresh. And now if I go to File, Document Properties, and Properties, this is the new value. There you go. So this is the basics of data functions. In the next few videos and series, we're going to go into a lot of the more interesting things you can do in data functions and how I personally use it to build full-blown apps. We'll stop here for this video. If you have any questions or requests on what you'd like to see next, please feel free to comment below or add me on LinkedIn, Hussam Rahman, and send me a message. Appreciate you guys tuning in, and let me know if you have any feedback. I'll see you guys in the next one.